Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cybersecurity Leadership Series organized by Cyber Houston. We're excited to have you join us today. Ransomware continues to plague governments and companies worldwide. Today's power panel is shifting the discussion towards the payment of ransoms. Ransomware payments are up, both in frequency and amounts, and in most cases, Bitcoin is the cryptocurrency of choice. Our panel discussion today offers insights into the basics of cryptocurrency and where Bitcoin fits in, the legal aspects of using Bitcoin to make payments, whether or not you need to establish your own Bitcoin wallet, and really interesting, how did the FBI recover part of the ransom that Colonial Pipeline had paid? Before we get started, a quick housekeeping note. First and foremost, I'm announcing a save the date. So please mark your calendars for this year's 2021 Houston Cyber Summit. It will be an all-day virtual event on October 20th. Next, post your comments and questions into the chat section, and we're going to do our best to get to all of your questions live during our session. My name is John Villanti. I'm the Senior Vice President of Information Security at Allegiance Bank, and I will be your moderator today. Joining us is a hand-picked group of panelists that I'm really, really excited about. We were having some pre-session conversations and run-throughs, and Joel and Clif are going to do an absolutely amazing job today. We really do have something for everybody. Cyber Houston is a Department of Homeland Security recognized information sharing and analysis organization. We're a coalition of volunteers representing leaders from business, cybersecurity, academia, government, and other civic leaders. Our goal is to continuously educate and inform business leaders on how to manage and govern cybersecurity risk. It's my pleasure to introduce our two panelists, Joel Colvin and Clif Triplett. Joel is an attorney, mediator, and consultant that focuses on cybersecurity and business law. Outside of the courtroom, Joel's an acrobatic flight instructor and regularly plays sax in bands around Houston. Clif Triplett is the executive director for cybersecurity and risk management at Kearney, a global management and consulting firm with more than 3,600 staff working in over 40 countries. Clif has extensive experience in information technology and cybersecurity spanning the military, government, and private industry. A big welcome to Joel and Clif today for being with us. We do have a lot to cover, so we're going to get straight to it. Ransomware continues to plague companies and governments across the globe. Some have gone as far as calling it a threat to national security. We can't talk about ransomware and ransom payments without talking about Bitcoin. Joel, I'm wondering if you could start us out and describe to us, what is cryptocurrency?
Sure, thank you, John. So first, I'll give you my definition, and then we'll break it down into its components. But cryptocurrency in general is a type of virtual currency. It's usually not dependent on any government or a single trusted third party. It's implemented on something called a distributed ledger, and it's managed on a peer-to-peer network. So that's a lot. But it's really kind of a confluence of two main technologies that happen over the years, where we have this evolution of database technology from a single monolithic system to a distributed system on trusted nodes to what cryptocurrency runs on, which is a distributed system on untrusted nodes, and evolution of currency that has gone from we just trade goods, then we have a government that has money. I'm skipping a lot of steps, of course, and then we have virtual representations of that money, and then cryptocurrency is a virtual method of storing value that's not tied to any physical thing. So let me give you a good example that I like to use to describe the difference. We're all used to writing checks. Let's say I write a check to John for $100. My check is actually a promise to pay that tells my bank, pay John $100. I'm counting on the bank to ensure that John doesn't cash that check multiple times and get several $100s. And if Clif here steals the check from John before he gets to cash it, and he cashes it, I can go to the bank and try to reverse that transaction. The difference with typical cryptocurrency is this. When I use cryptocurrency to pay somebody, it's an immediate pay. It's like cash. It's not a promise to pay. There is no trusted third party that makes sure that my money is not spent multiple times, what they call the double spending problem. And that's accomplished through the way the peer-to-peer network comes to a consensus on a valid transaction. And lastly, which is troublesome for lawyers like me, is there's no reversibility. If that money gets transferred, I have to go through a lot of machinations in order to try to stop that transaction. I can't really stop it. I can try to seize the account. A lot would have to happen there. And so that big difference is that cryptocurrency, not dependent on any third trusted party, maintains its own self-consistency as to what is a valid transaction, and it's an immediate pay. And it's not based on what we would call fiat currency, or most cryptocurrencies are not, where it's not a direct reflection of the US dollar. It's its own thing. It's its own storage of value.
So what about Bitcoin, Joel, and its place in a ransomware attack?
Well, Bitcoin, while not the first virtual currency, was the first cryptocurrency that meets all the definitions that I talked about. And its popularity comes from the fact that it was first, it's pretty widely used. It's trivial to set up what we'd call a Bitcoin wallet in order to send or receive money. And there's a strong component of anonymity in that process, which makes it very much a preferred method for illegal activity. And because it's so widely used and been around for so long, that when specifically in the case of a ransomware attack, they want to get paid in something that governments have a really hard time tracking you down for. And that's why Bitcoin, while some of the other cryptocurrencies have been used, it's the most prevalent method of asking for payment for lots of illegal activity, including ransomware.
Great, thank you, Joel. The Justice Department reported a successful mission to retrieve 2.3 million in Bitcoin that was paid by Colonial Pipeline to ransomware attackers back in April. And we just talked about the fact that there's an anonymity aspect of Bitcoin. And these court documents indicated that investigators traced the Bitcoin transactions to a digital wallet, which they were able to seize it under a court order. Officials were then able to access that wallet with something called a private key or a password. So my question, Clif, is based on anonymity and what we know happened with the Justice Department, how did the FBI recover part of the ransom if Bitcoin is anonymous?
This is Clif's opinion. I don't have, classified information on this to share with you, but my opinion is that the way this system works is through these miners who help control the ledger, as was mentioned. And my belief is that the FBI has access or is one of the pseudo miners to the ledger, and they can see the ledger. Most organizations cannot see the ledger. The ledger, though most transactions are encrypted, you can see between which two accounts money was exchanged, because that's basically what's happening, is moving the coin from one to the other. So if they know the amounts, the time, and so forth, they could probably find out who the two parties were in the ledger. And they can't reverse it, but my opinion is they can create another transaction. So if they found out who received the payment, which account, if they're quick enough and the money isn't moved once again to a secondary account, and tracing the through the ledger, though, it's all going to be visible because it's like a blockchain. It's a blockchain ledger. Then what they'll do is figure out, we know when it happened, we know the amount, we can see the transaction, we can see where it went. Let's run another transaction against that account. And my guess is the reason they didn't get it all is because that account that received the money was then quickly distributing it across multiple other accounts and basically laundering their Bitcoin between different anonymous entities. Again, that's a Clif Triplett opinion, not a Kearney opinion, or one that I can divulge from any government source.
Understood. Thank you, Cliff. Yeah, and I think it's fair to say we're all speaking on behalf of each other as individuals, and our views don't necessarily reflect that of our employers. Of course, Joel owns his own law firm, so maybe he's somewhat different. So moving on, a vast majority of ransomware attacks request payment with Bitcoin, which is largely due to its popularity and the fact that it, like we just learned, it's so easy to set up. It's a very popular digital currency. And Cliff, I'd like to stay with you and ask you, what's your opinion about companies establishing a digital wallet in advance of an attack so that they could potentially accelerate a ransomware payment should they choose to pay?
I think there's two types of organizations. One who have chosen to get an insurance policy against things like ransomware, and those who have not. And those who have chosen to get an insurance program, I would say let all that happen over by the insurance company. Joel's going to talk about some of the legal ramifications and risks of the Bitcoin. So just, in my opinion, pass it on to your insurance carrier. However, if you don't have insurance carrier, the ability to get a Bitcoin wallet, an account, is very simple. There's almost no cost to it, and allows you to act fast if you choose that's what you choose to do. So again, first choice, if you have insurance, go with the insurance, let them deal with it. If you don't, it's a fast, simple process to do. In my mind, it's so fast and simple, you can almost wait for the event to happen. But if it makes you more comfortable getting one, I think there's very low risk. I think the only thing to be cautious of is make sure you get a recognized Bitcoin broker or wallet. Don't just try to get the latest and greatest, because I would suspect with all that's going on, there's going to be a scam out there for Bitcoin wallets.
Fishing for Bitcoin, I can see it now, right? So I would just like to echo on what Cliff just said. If you don't have cyber insurance, that's a topic that goes beyond just ransomware. And I would urge you to speak with an insurance broker and evaluate the possibilities that you have at your disposal to pick up some cybersecurity insurance. There's some great benefits of it, to include attorney-client privilege. They could potentially even negotiate ransom payments downhill on your behalf. I would anticipate that rates are going up, and there's a lot more exclusions in those policies than ever before, but you won't know till you contact your broker and inquire. Now, we've really done a great job to run through some of those basics of cryptocurrency. We've talked about the blockchain, we've talked about Bitcoin and various elements of it. And it really brings us to the meat of our session, and a really, really important topic that as business leaders, we all need to get comfortable with and we all need to understand. And that's the legal status of Bitcoin. And actually, the legal status of Bitcoin varies from state to state. It's still undefined or changing in many of them. Some states explicitly allow cryptocurrencies. Others have banned or restricted it. And we're really lucky to have Joel as an attorney on our panel. And this is going to be a real back and forth conversation with Joel and Cliff. But Joel, I'd like to start out by asking you what your thoughts are on the legality of Bitcoin.
Sure, thank you. There is nothing inherently illegal about Bitcoin itself. What you have to worry about is that its use can trigger obligations or possibly lead to the whole transaction becoming illegal. This is no different really than, if you pay a ransomware company cash, you're going to have some of the same problems from a legal standpoint. but it's the status is in flux all over the world as to whether or not you could use it at all, whether or not you can mine it, whether or not you can possess it. It depends on where you are in the world. And there are some US states that permit you to, I think Arizona was going to permit you to pay your taxes through Bitcoin, which sounds crazy to me from their standpoint. But so you really have to keep an eye on whether or not the thing you're going to do with Bitcoin is today a legal thing that you can do.
Please go ahead, Joel.
So I was just going to give some examples of the kinds of things that you also have to worry about. The first off is what kind of status Bitcoin has to the IRS. The IRS refers to Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies as a virtual currency, and to them, it's property. Under tax law, anytime you hold property and you sell it, there's a tax consequence. You either made money at it or you lost money at it. So you have to keep track of what you bought it at and then what you sold it at so that you can declare how much profit that you made on that. And quite a few people have got in trouble where they're just doing transactions back and forth. They think they're making free money on a platform separate of US dollars, and then they get nailed for huge tax bills that they're unprepared to pay on its own. And so if you were to have a Bitcoin wallet, dump $100,000 into it in order to pay a ransom for something, and before you pay the ransom, with as volatile as Bitcoin is, if it went up another couple $1,000s per coin, you may actually have a tax consequence for your company or yourself at the time that you then transfer the money off to somebody else, in addition to all the other things that can be legal problems for you at that point. There's also the problem with, can you actually pay somebody a ransom? And to take that, I'll step back one place. When you pay anybody anything, or you do any kind of transaction that is worth money, everybody is, although they don't know it, is supposed to check to make sure that there are no US sanctions or treaties that you're going to violate in that transaction. And the vast majority of the time for us in the US, we're doing transactions to other people in the US. We don't think about this. Ransomware is the opposite. The vast majority of the time, you don't know where they are. They very well may be in another country. And different ransomware organizations are placed on the US sanctions list. So paying a ransom is a violation of US sanctions. Paying your money to somebody else so that they pay the ransom for you is actually a violation of sanctions for both of you. You can't, anybody who thinks they have a way to get around the law for that can often be in trouble for evading the law. And the consequences to your company are severe. They can take the money from the transaction. They can, if you made any profit, they can keep the profit. They can fine you up to $250,000. And there's a separate criminal prosecution component for it. So you really need to have that checked in advance if you're going to pay anything like that. And then I'd like to echo what was said earlier. If you have cyber insurance, you might be violating your cyber insurance. If you don't have cyber insurance and you're subject to the kind of situation where you might be paying many thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of dollars, then that's definitely bad on your part for not having the insurance.
Joel, I think I want to add one thing to your list of potential risk. If you are found guilty, you also have potential of losing your contract if you're a major government supplier.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and so what's interesting on what Joel mentioned about that, we see the URL right now. This was from October of 2020, where Treasury kind of let us know that making payments, ransomware payments, might be illegal. Some of these payments may actually be funding terrorism. So there's a really strong reason why not to pay a ransom. And it's really easy right here and right now to say, don't pay the ransom, right? So we're sitting here at 0 miles per hour. Life is good. That rapidly changes when hundreds of thousands of files across hundreds of servers and all your endpoints are no longer available to you. And there's a business decision that needs to be made. And in many cases, that business decision is pushed by the double jeopardy nature of current ransomware, whereby they're going to release your private data in a very public way. So in many cases, you may not be paying so much for the decryption key as you are the promise that the adversary doesn't leak your private data to the public. Ransomware, it's an interesting topic, and payments of ransoms, there's been kind of a twist. President Biden issued a ransomware reward, and it was in the news recently, which starts to signal a little bit of a whole of government approach towards ransomware, ransom payments. And Clif, based on your background, I'm wondering what your thoughts are and what your inputs are as we approach ransomware with a whole of government approach, whether you anticipate any pending legislation that would happen, and how that might impact some of our business leaders that are either watching or listening to this session.
I want to answer that in two ways. So one, legislation. I think there's legislation going on in the U.S. government, at least the discussions. I know it's going on in other countries as well, about just making it more clear payment of ransomware is not going to be legal, mostly because of the fear it's going to terrorists and such. But I think the other thing that's going on equally and perhaps even more importantly is new treaties. Okay, and some of that kind of discussion we just saw Biden having with Putin, and that is you need to go chase these bad guys, because what's happening right now, too many of them, the vast majority, are basically, at least publicly, perceived to be getting away with this, which is motivating more and more to get in the game and play it because the consequences are limited. Most of these attacks are crossing international borders, and the treaties aren't in place or the resources to really chase them down and hold them accountable. But I think that's changing. These kind of conversations of treaties between organizations to create means by which to pursue and prosecute those executing these ransomware attacks I think this is the way they got to do it, okay? Just telling you it's illegal and take the hit in your business, that's very difficult for a business to take. But actually putting some fear and risk in executing the attack is more what I think it is. So I see you're going to see more investment for the Justice Department and some of our international intelligence organizations to be able to chase down and find these people and with treaties prosecute. And once a couple of those scenarios are executed and it becomes more likely that you'll be caught than not because of the power of some of organizations like the U.S. has, that's how it's going to turn. It's not going to just turn by saying don't do it. It's going to be turned by putting risk on the adversary.
That's great. Thanks, Cliff. When I think about ransomware payments, I was talking with a former panelist, Pierluigi Stella, and he made a great comment. He said the best way to pay your ransom is not to pay the ransom, because don't get infected with ransomware. And that's easier said than done, but we'd be remiss if we had a panel on ransomware payments and Bitcoin and cryptocurrency if we didn't, hammer down the fact that we can beat ransomware. It's just another piece of untrusted code. And there's a lot of great guidance from the NSA, from CISA, from the FBI. And I almost want to say there's a brand new website, stopransomware.gov. If you haven't been there, take a look at it. And there's some great advice and guidance that can A, help you prevent it, and B, potentially help you through it with those legal resources. We've been able to get through some of our questions really quite quickly today. And I'd encourage our viewers and listeners to pop into your chat window and post some questions for us. In the absence of any of those questions, I'm going to kind of enter a little bit of a quick fire round. And I'm going to open this up to each panelist to give us a thought. Doesn't have to be your final thought, but in your opinion, Clif, what's the most important aspect? If we think about this ransomware game involving cryptocurrency, involving Bitcoin, what's the number one piece of advice or most important thought you have on that topic?
And I've mentioned this before, is reduce the size of risk you have exposed. Okay, I call it volume risk reduction. But right now, the problem is if you had an attack, how big of an impact is it? Can you divide up your information, your systems, your technology such that if you're compromised, it's not your entire enterprise, but it's a piece that you can recover? And with that, the second piece is we've spent a lot of money on protect. Let's just assume it's going to get compromised in today's connected world. Where are you on your ability to respond and recover? So more investment in respond and recover, and on the protect side, reducing the risk footprint within your organization.
And Joel, I'll ask you the same question.
Yeah, this is a general category of things that attorneys deal with all the time. We're trying to convince our clients to do something about a particular risk now. And we know all the time that companies are reluctant to spend money now for something that they think is not that likely, or it hadn't happened to them before, so they don't really understand the scope of their risk. And this is one of those cases where it's kind of nice that it's in the news so often, but it's the kind of thing that, if you would have been willing to pay $100,000 ransom, why not spend some of that money in advance for doing the proper protection and recovery that Clif was talking about? Instead of waiting only until the bad thing happens. Do you have your insurance up to date such that they will help you out? Do you have the procedures inside that are going to properly protect you? Do you have a monitoring system so that you can tell that this happened in the first place, so that you can respond quickly? And if you don't spend those things in advance, that's where companies get in that situation where they go, well, we're screwed. I've got to just pay this ransomware so I can get my data back, because I have no other way to get back to business. And it's hard, but companies have to spend that time in advance because it's a realistic risk that they have to deal with. And if you go through all this and try to keep it quiet and not let anybody know, you've got all sorts of other issues and other legal problems that are going to come up when you do that. So spend the time now on it. I know it's hard when you've got 1,000 other things on your to-do list, but think of what I'm often telling people, if that happened to you today, how bad would your day be? And if it's absolutely horrible, then why don't you do something about it a little bit at a time, so that you're handling that in advance instead of just make it up as you go when the event occurs.
Yeah, Joel, I think that's absolutely fantastic advice. And I'm going to say it in maybe just some different words. And what Joel just told us is the first step in incident response handling is preparation. So if you look at NIST Special Publication 800-61 Rev 2, that's going to be their guidance on incident response handling. And in kind of a summary view of that document is get prepared, learn how to properly identify an incident, learn how to contain that incident, learn how to eradicate the malware, go into recovery of your operational systems, and then engage in a lessons learned kind of a debriefing of everything that happened to improve your processes, your policies, and your procedures used in incident response. And that would then further spur me to say, do you have an incident response plan? Do you know what you're going to do? When you're not impacted by ransomware is the perfect time to build your playbook, to build that set of steps that you're going to do. What comes first? Why does it come first? And do you have at your fingertips all the contact information you're going to need for your internal stakeholders versus external stakeholders? What are the triggers by which you're going to inform your board of directors? Are there any regulatory bodies that you need to inform? What about customer notification? If you're in the state of Texas and the impacted customer is a resident of the state of Texas, there's implications with the Attorney General and other types of notifications in the state. It gets really complicated pretty quickly. So that has to happen when you're going 0 miles per hour, sitting on the ground, not 100 miles an hour, hair on fire.
And I'd like to add one small thing to that. Have your response plan somewhere offline. Because if they encrypt all of your data, and you have to get to your hard disk in order to find out who you call, you're way behind the 8 ball.
Let me just add that, though. One of the things I see wrong with these plans, because there's good and bad, is you need to really think about this as an operational integrity program. And, you don't always know it was a cyber attack. Okay. It could have been a gopher, a backhoe. It could have been just a failed piece of software. We have operational issues. What you need to do is start thinking about, first, was it potentially a cyber attack? Not first, was it operational until I clear all operational possible root causes. Then I'll call the cybersecurity guy and see what they think. Okay, this either has to be a parallel activity or start with cyber first. Okay, on the playbook. Now, the upside to that, if you start with that attitude, cyber first, then you'll practice it every day. And when that event happens, you will execute with precision and you'll have the right kind of response. Now, my government experience was I was brought into the government after the OPM breach. They really failed on that. They didn't have the playbook, and Congress ate them up, justice ate them up, everybody ate them up for their behavior. We put in a playbook, and we had an event after the playbook, and where it took us weeks and months in the original one to get everything right. President Obama was very concerned about how OPM was going to respond. We went from identification of incident to closure at his office in 45 minutes. Okay, with messaging, with all the points John was making, but it was all called out in the playbook, and it was called out with precision, and we got an attaboy from the ugly child to attaboy in a very short period. So 2 things, I totally agree with John. Get a playbook, but use the playbook every day if you can. Don't wait for the event that you finally determine, hey, maybe this was cyber, because we can't find any other excuse.
Now that is a great war story. I mean, so much of what we hear, the war story has a really bad and negative outcome. So that is the epitome, right? When I talked about NIST guidance on incident response handling, the 6th and final step is lessons learned. And what Clif just told us is that OPM followed that. They went through, they learned their lesson, they improved their process, their guidance, and all their activities surrounding incident response. And personally, if I could go from detection to closure of an incident in 45 minutes with something as significant as ransomware, that is probably the would be the biggest victory of my entire professional career. That is absolutely fantastic.
John, I just want to build on one thing, why that might be possible, and I think Joel may have mentioned it. There's something called the kill chain from Lockheed Martin 2011 model on how this software typically gets into an organization, and it starts off the reconnaissance. If you can catch it way back then you can bring this whole thing to closure quickly. If you wait till full exploitation, it ain't gonna happen in 45 minutes, okay? So the sooner you can catch and disrupt the kill chain, the more advantageous it is to you and more likely you can avoid paying that ransom.
And I'd like to leapfrog on the kill chain. As defenders, we often say, we have to do everything right all the time. The attacker only needs to be right once, and we lose. And if we think about Clif's reference to the kill chain, the attacker actually steps through several discrete tasks along the way. So they have a path to target, and they have to do a lot of different things. And as defenders, if we can trip them up in any one of those steps on the path to target, we buy ourselves more time, we buy ourselves more detection, and we potentially can stamp them out of the environment. And Joel, it looked like you might have something to add to this.
Yeah, I wanted to add something to Clif's great advice about the way you treat incidents. If you treat everything as potentially a cybersecurity incident, you're going to be better off, because when it is and when it's bad, somebody's going to be suing somebody. And if you treat everything as an operational issue, and you go in and say, well, I need the system back online, I'm going to clean this stuff off, I'm going to put it back online, you've now just intentionally spoiled the evidence that might be used in litigation. And you've hurt your own chances of defending yourself, because sometimes all the other side has to say is, you didn't detect this properly, you didn't do proper mitigation. And they go, well, we did. And they'll say, well, prove it. And you've destroyed your own proof of the situation. And so if you treat it more of a cybersecurity incident from the beginning, then, and if you have, depending on the size of your organization, if you have general counsel or an equivalent who's part of the overall cybersecurity response team, when you want to roll them in and out, then they know early enough to say, hey, we need to do litigation holds on all of this, and this. Versus if you just respond, put the thing back online, and didn't discover till later that there was actually a separate break-in. It was not just an operational problem, and they get in again. You've now shown that you're unable to handle the protection of your own data. And that just leads to a whole host of other legal problems for you that you might have been able to defend in the beginning had you treated it properly in the beginning.
I just want to add to Joel's thing, again, back to those lessons learned. Joel talked about, protecting the evidence. Well, there's two capabilities a typical IT shop may not have thought about, okay, that are really core competencies. And one is, how does one execute a litigation hold? And two, how does one create a forensic image? Because the courts are looking for those two things. And if you say, well, I don't know, and therefore all the evidence is destroyed, the first thing they're going to go is it was a cover-up. Okay. So, but if you know how to do it and you can execute and pull those triggers appropriately, you're going to be in a much better situation, both in getting support from, say, the Justice Department, or having to go to court and defend yourself in a lawsuit.
And one other thing directly related to that and the legality of paying ransomware, OFAC, who's the organization that deals with, have you illegally paid something against the U.S. sanction? They do in fact give you some leeway if you can show that you've done all these things properly. Maybe you didn't know that you were not supposed to pay these people, but you can show a good trail of how you detected it, what you did, all the way down the line. You're going to get some relief in their penalties, is kind of the way that they would say it. And so that's why it's like when you have a cybersecurity incident in general, not just ransomware, one of your early calls, and I'm not just saying this because I'm an attorney, I was a cybersecurity consultant before that. One of your early calls really needs to be your equivalent of general counsel. Get them in on it so that they know something's going on. As soon as you get past the identification of an event that might be serious violation of policy in one regard or another, you need to give heads up to your counsel so that they can help you make sure you stay out of all these whole host of other problems for you.
Let me just talk about Joel's point, just back to the OPM scenario. Okay. Let's say we got an announcement from a vendor. I'm just going to say Microsoft, not just as an illustration. Okay. Microsoft announces there's a potential vulnerability. Okay. Immediately upon vulnerability, we did a check against our CMDB of where's the possible exposure. Once we understood the possible exposure, almost immediately we went to see counsel to tell them, here's the potential risk should this exploit be exploited. Okay, hasn't even happened yet. We're just saying, here's a possible scenario. We right away call legal and we right away call communications and say, what's our risk? What's our position? And we have a quick deliberation with those guys right then on some of the next steps and resources to be released to go after it based on the potential risk and impact. But, sometimes if you're an IT guy, you may not understand the implications that this particular event could happen from either a legal standpoint or, say, brand. So I say the sooner the better. And if you get a situation where this is normal, I can tell you legal counsel likes to be brought in earlier than after the fact, and we've made mistakes. Okay, so I'd say as soon as you think there is a reasonable threat to potential impact that would probably make the press or cause harm to the business, you need to be calling legal.
Yeah, that's a great point, Cliff. It's not like fine wine, and that news won't get better with time. So as I did see a question from Peter Thomas. Joel, I think I'd like you to address this. What is the liability for infected customers when that ransomware comes in via a trusted third-party software? So if we think about Kaseya in the recent news, there was some vulnerabilities. Kaseya was leveraged through managed service providers, and their end customers ended up getting ransomware. What does that liability picture look like for Kaseya? What does that liability picture look like for the managed service provider?
Well, it becomes very difficult, and this is one of the reasons why I'm always looking for, in the contracts that you sign with vendors, suppliers, companies where you host your data, companies where you purchase your software, that there are clauses in there that deal with situation like that, so that you can get properly notified, because you may have notification responsibilities. For instance, if this was privacy data, you've got a short time frame in which to send your notifications out in most jurisdictions. If all these documents are going to push liability around, and it depends on basically how strong you are in the negotiating environment. So sometimes the third party, what you would want is that the third party indemnifies you against any damage that you take that was a result of their bad performance, which goes back to can you prove who created the problem in the first place? And so the answer to that question is not simple, because it's going to be dependent on both tort law, which is the law of somebody injured me in some way, who can I get back for it to get recovery, and contract law, what kinds of contracts you have with the people that you're doing business with. If you simply purchase software off the shelf or the equivalent, there's going to be a really long software license agreement in there. And, you know, a lot of people just click through it or don't read all the fine details, but in there, it's going to say what their liability is going to be if something happens on their end. And it usually will say something like, and you can sue us for not more than the cost of the software, or something like that. Or if it's a monthly service, it's going to say not more than the months of service that you paid for. In both those cases, that's almost trivial compared to your actual loss when the event happens, which brings us back to you're going to need insurance if this is at all a risk that you're worried about, because it's the only way to cover that gap. But good contracts with all the other parties that deal with your data is essential. And contracts that have, in the US and in the EU, they call them different things, information protection agreements or data protection agreements, writers onto their contracts to say, here's your responsibility on how you're going to protect the kinds of things that you do that you're responsible for, and here's our responsibilities. That's where you're going to be able to figure out where the liability is, which is why in Clif's description, when the lawyers are consulted early, they get that opportunity to look through and see where all that liability flows. And then they can give advice back to say, all right, if that does actually happen in Clif's scenario, here are the kinds of things that I want you to do first so that we're as best protected as we can. And you don't always expect the IT director to be able to answer all those questions, because it's a legal analysis in addition to a technical analysis.
Yeah, which is a great reason for your incident response team to have multiple disciplines on it. You know, you're going to have the need for executives and management to make key decisions. You're going to have a need for hands-on keyboard technical assets doing that tactical response. But then there's everything in the middle, all those coordination elements that you deal with inside of a breach, legal, communications, things of that nature. So it's not just a technology problem. And you're always going to need a line of business leader in there as well. There's going to be a primary system that's impacted. What's the true impact to the business? And that line of business leader understands and communicate to the executives, this is what it means to us from an operational perspective. And of course, your business continuity and disaster recovery staff need to be a part of that conversation as well, because the incident may spur activation or spin up of a colo site or a cold DR site. One of the questions I saw in the comments area from Jesse takes us back to insurance. And he asks about, can we assume that an insurance company understands the OFAC laws and understands what a legal versus an illegal payment is? And I'm wondering, Joel and Clif, your thoughts on the astuteness of cyber insurance companies relating to this topic.
I think there's two aspects to it. When you look at insurance, your premium's based on the risks they assess with your particular business. Okay, one, perhaps the industry, but two, your preparedness. You know, having that playbook, having demonstrated, doing the things we've been talking about, it's going to lower your premiums. So you're going to get two things out of a good discussion and an ongoing conversation with your insurance party. Is one, they're going to bring legal perspective. Two, but they're also going to be encouraging you with premiums to do the right thing, which can help you with your internal business case to do the right thing. And I think the other big point I want to make, I know it wasn't exactly Jesse's question, but if you're doing the right thing for cyber, the secondary consequence, which is really great, is you improve your overall operational integrity. So, you know, your overall systems are going to be better. So if you have the playbook and you can respond very quick, you're going to be able to respond whether it was a cyber attack or a piece of hardware failed. And if you can demonstrate those things, and have that conversation, I think you'll just be smarter and you'll be less exposed. So I think it's the whole conversation of driving your premium down. That's how I always looked at it. How can I get that insurance guy to get me the lowest premium? That's because I'm going to have superior performance and therefore assess less risk. But I do think they should, and if they don't have the right legal support, probably the wrong insurance carrier. And then you can have that informed conversation of the risk you're taking by paying.
Joel, is there anything you wanted to add on to Clif's response?
Yeah, the cyber insurance, maybe only 2 or 3 years ago, I read a lot of these insurance policies, and just a couple years ago, each one I looked at was dramatically different because, frankly, they're making it up as they go. And there isn't like an insurance standard on what cybersecurity insurance looks like. It's gotten a little better. And on Clif's point, there are more of them that are putting in things that say that if you perform reasonable security measures, that's going to, what that's defined as, but that's going to lower the fees that you pay for the cyber insurance. But back to that original question, you can't assume that the insurance companies are aware of the situations. Now, they have sometimes dramatically different definitions of what a breach is that may or may not include ransomware, for instance. And on the one hand, if your insurance carrier takes over and they decide they're going to pay the ransom, you might be off the hook from violating a U.S. sanction rule. It's going to be in your insurance company because they'll indemnify you against their actions that they do for that, probably. But you really need to look at, or have your attorney look at what those insurance policies are and what they cover. One of the things I run into all the time is their definition of a breach is not inclusive enough to cover the state definitions of a breach. And so the state of California, for instance, might say, you've had a breach and you have to do these things, and your insurance carrier says, but it doesn't meet our definition, so we're not covering it. That's getting a little better these days because they're making better breach definitions in their policies. But that's a difficult issue, and everyone you look at is going to look different.
Thanks, Joel. So one of the big takeaways for me on this session is, we know that these ransom payments are most always being demanded in Bitcoin, and there's no need to run out and get your own digital wallet. We know that there could be some OFAC and other legal implications of paying ransom, so make sure you check with general counsel, and it's always advisable to have a cybersecurity insurance policy. They'll provide you with some legal guidance. They'll interact with general counsel, and oftentimes they have some digital forensic experts that they hire on your behalf to help you through these tough times. They'll also be able to negotiate your ransom and that lower Bitcoin payment, if indeed that's part of your future. I'd like to thank all of our viewers and listeners today. I really appreciate you spending time with us. I hope this session provided you with some insights into Bitcoin, its place in the cryptocurrency ecosystem, and its linkages to ransomware. Clif, Joel, I can't thank you enough for your outstanding insights and thoughts, and for volunteering your time to Cyber Houston and our community. For our viewers, this presentation will be available on the Cyber Houston Facebook page, our YouTube channel, and the cyberhouston.org website. I'd encourage you to subscribe to the Cyber Houston YouTube channel and follow our Cyber Houston Facebook page. Remember to hit the notification button to receive updates on new cybersecurity leadership content. At Cyber Houston, we do our best to take lessons learned from our enterprise members, distill them into sensible economic guidance to help small and medium-sized businesses improve their cyber posture and help them to build resilience. We're here for you, and we're committed to the overall economic vitality of all enterprises with a sharp focus on our SMBs. This guidance to you comes in the form of a business vitality guide, guidance for the board of directors, a free cyber scan, and a cyber preparedness assessment available as a PDF or online. All the resources are free of charge and can be found under the resources tab on the cyberhouston.org website. And again, a special thanks to our sponsors, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, Blue Lance, Renica Digital, and the University of Houston Downtown. Until later, remain cyber strong, and certainly all our best wishes that there's no ransomware payments in your future. And a last reminder, save that date, October 20th. We're going to be having the 2021 Houston Cyber Summit. This is going to be a full-day virtual event, guaranteed to have something for everybody. Thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.